know they're watching me right now, and they're mad at me.
Needless to say, devastated and really shaken to my core when I first heard this news. And I spoke to all the girls personally, and I encouraged all of them, any of them who had actually been harmed, to please come forward.
So freaking mean to me. I was in shock.
Do you take responsibility for the situation that you're in right now?
100%.
100%.
100%. I couldn't believe it because I loved her so much. I admired her and looked up to her. And she pretty much reprimanded me.
Has had a lot of controversy around her African school for girls, with huge conspiracy theories starting that these girls were going missing from Oprah's school. All of these theories started shortly after Oprah opened her school in 2007, and the matriarch of that school was charged with SA of 7 different girls. Oprah ended up offering a public apology to the parents and the children and citing her own SA incidents in this apology. But the matriarch would then be found not guilty of these crimes. But then it shocked the nation because shortly after this, Oprah's school was hit with another SA allegation. 7 students were suspended for harassing and fondling classmates. And a lot of people thought that this stemmed from the very first incident because why would these children be acting like this? And the rumors started swirling after this point because they just didn't understand how these things could happen so close to one another. And then boom, there was another investigation at Oprah's school after the body of a newborn was found in a girl's book bag.
Be able to make out with Oprah, to have love scenes with her and those tiggle bitties. I mean, she's such a lovely, voluptuous woman. So being able to, she's very, very, very beautiful, and that was wonderful.
I would have loved to have been rolling in the sheets with Terrence. I'd like to give that a try one afternoon.
A raise. I haven't seen a raise in my income since Proud Mary. And almost had to walk away from Color Purple. Yes, ma'am. Who said what? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Because you know what? If I don't take a stand, how am I making it easy for Fantasia and Danielle and Hallie and Felicia?
Mother's home. I came out like 12 o'clock in the afternoon, May 24th. She was bent over, actually planting flowers in the garden, and I walked over here to sit in the actual vehicle that my friend was waiting for me in, and the car pulled up on the side of us. A guy got out the passenger seat of that car, came around behind it, and shot through the actual car.
What does it feel like to be shot? Is it a physical feeling?
Yeah, it doesn't hurt as much as people imagine it hurts because of your adrenaline and how the shock of what's actually going on. It hurts after.
Did you feel the first one or the 9th one?
I don't even know. I didn't know my legs were broke.
Really?
When I tried to get out the car at the hospital, both of my legs were broke. Like I broken 3 places on this side, and then
where were you shot?
In my hands, my legs several times, like 5 times in my hands, and then in my legs, and then in my face. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when going through that experience, when you get hurt that bad, either your fear consumes you or you become a bit insensitive. Mm-hmm. So just after...
Which one was it for you?
There was a point that I was afraid.
Afraid?
Yeah, following that, actually being shot. It was like I was afraid because everybody involved in the situation was still physically available to do the part too.
Yes.
Yeah, to just do it again. And then it was like, I got tired of, in the recovery process, I got tired of being afraid. Mm-hmm. And then the only way that I could, like, to cover those emotions were to be a little more aggressive.
And insensitive.
Yeah, and to be angry about the situation opposed to dealing with how I was actually feeling at that point. And
how were you actually feeling?
The physical part hurt, and there was confusion because
you hurt afterwards. You don't hurt for the immediate.
Yeah, after you know you're going to be fine, it really starts hurting. You know what I mean? Like the doctor tells you you're good, then it's just really bones aching. You feel like you got a headache in your hip, middle of your body, and then it's like, I know I'm going to be fine, but it hurts so bad.
Did you ever find out who did it?
Yeah, I knew who did it shortly after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they are now where?
Oh, the guy who actually shot is dead. And the guy who paid him got life in jail.
Got life in jail. Favorite meal for him?
When he was growing up, its favorite food was pork and beans and Franks.
Really? You still like him?
Yeah. It was the fast.
For decades, Oprah Winfrey has been untouchable, America's trusted voice, Hollywood's moral compass, the woman who could make or break a career with a single endorsement. But lately, the silence around her has been cracking. One by one, major black artists are stepping forward with eerily similar stories. Private confrontations, public humiliation, stalled careers, and a powerful figure they say operated behind scenes. From shocking allegations tied to her South African school to explosive claims from Terrence Howard, 50 Cent, and Monique, and more, a pattern is emerging that people can't ignore anymore. And now the question everyone's asking is simple, but dangerous. Has Oprah's influence finally become her biggest liability? For decades, Oprah Winfrey didn't just dominate television, she defined it. She was the ultimate seal of approval. The woman whose couch could turn pain into purpose and scandal into redemption. An Oprah appearance wasn't just publicity, it was validation. Presidents sat with her. Survivors trusted her. Celebrities feared disappointing her. Her name became synonymous with truth, healing, and moral authority. So much so that questioning her influence once felt almost unthinkable. If Oprah believed in you, the world followed. And if she didn't, people quietly noticed. But now, that untouchable image is colliding head-on with a very different conversation, one that refuses to stay buried. This isn't a sudden takedown or a viral hate train. It's something slower, heavier, and far more uncomfortable. Old interviews are being replayed with new eyes. Long-dismissed complaints are being re-examined. And voices that were once labeled difficult, bitter, or crazy are suddenly sounding eerily consistent. The shift isn't about tearing Oprah down. It's about a culture that no longer accepts power without accountability, no matter how polished or beloved the figure holding it. What makes this moment so unsettling is that the stories don't come from strangers or internet trolls. They come from people who once admired her, worked with her, trusted her, or benefited from her platform, until they didn't. Artists who described private reprimands that contradicted public praise. Guests who felt humiliated instead of heard. Careers that mysteriously stalled after moments of public disagreement. For years, these accounts existed on the fringes, brushed off as coincidence or ego clashes. Now, they're being placed side by side, and the similarities are harder to ignore. This is the reckoning Oprah never cultivated and never controlled. Not because she's suddenly changed, but because the audience has. We're living in a moment where legacy no longer shields anyone from scrutiny, and where silence is no longer mistaken for innocence. The question hanging in the air isn't whether Oprah did everything she's being accused of. It's whether her immense influence allowed patterns to exist without challenge for far too long. And once that question is asked out loud, there's no putting it back. The first real crack in Oprah's flawless image didn't come from Hollywood. It came thousands of miles away, wrapped in good intentions and global praise. In 2007, Oprah opened the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa, a highly publicized all-girls boarding school designed to uplift disadvantaged youth who otherwise had no access to elite education. Oprah called the students her daughters. The world applauded. It was framed as legacy work, the ultimate symbol of her commitment to empowerment, philanthropy, and the future of black girls. At the time, questioning anything about the school felt not only inappropriate, but almost cruel. Then the whispers started. Not online rumors at first, but formal charges that forced their way into public view. Just months after the school opened, reports surfaced that a dorm matron employed at the academy had been accused of sexually abusing multiple students. The allegations were serious, detailed, and impossible to dismiss. Oprah flew to South Africa personally, publicly apologized to the girls and their families, and fired the school's headmistress. She spoke emotionally about feeling devastated and betrayed, framing the incident as a heartbreaking failure of trust. Many people accepted that explanation, believing this was an isolated tragedy handled as responsibly as possible. But instead of closing the chapter, the controversy seemed to reopen it again and again. In the years that followed, more disturbing incidents emerged. Additional investigations took place. 7 students were later suspended for sexually harassing fellow classmates, sparking confusion and outrage about how such behavior could develop in a school created to protect vulnerable girls. Critics questioned whether earlier trauma had gone unaddressed, while supporters insisted the school was being unfairly scrutinized. Then came the moment that shocked the public all over again: the discovery of a newborn infant's body found in a student's bag, triggering yet another investigation and a wave of renewed suspicion. What unsettled people most wasn't just the severity of each individual incident. It was the repetition. Every time the story seemed resolved, another disturbing headline followed. Even when some charges resulted in acquittals or inconclusive outcomes, the questions lingered. How could so many extreme situations happen in the same place, under the watch of one of the most powerful women in the world? And why did every explanation feel incomplete? Oprah addressed some moments publicly, remained silent on others, and over time the school faded from mainstream conversation, but it never disappeared entirely. That's why this chapter still matters today. The South African school became the first time people realized that Oprah's influence didn't always translate into transparency or closure. It planted the earliest seeds of doubt, not enough to dismantle her reputation, but enough to make some people pause. And once doubt enters the narrative, it has a way of resurfacing later, especially when other stories begin to sound familiar. This wasn't the end of Oprah's untouchable era, but it was the beginning of the questions that would never fully go away. As the years passed, people didn't just remember the South African school. They remembered how often it resurfaced. What unsettled the public wasn't a single incident, but the pattern of disruption followed by partial answers. Investigations opened, apologies were issued, some charges were dropped, others led nowhere definitive, and yet the headlines kept coming. Each development seemed to contradict the last, creating a fog of uncertainty instead of closure. In that vacuum, speculation thrived. Rumors and conspiracy theories didn't grow because people wanted to believe the worst. They grew because nothing ever felt fully resolved. Silence, selective statements, and legal technicalities left room for the imagination to fill in the gaps. And once that happens, stories take on a life of their own. That lingering unease is what made later accusations feel familiar instead of shocking. When new voices spoke up years later, audiences didn't hear them in isolation. They stacked them against everything they already remembered. Different situations, different people, different stakes, but the same recurring theme: immense power, vulnerable individuals, and outcomes that never quite sat right. People weren't claiming proof, they were noticing patterns. And in pop culture, patterns are dangerous because once the public starts connecting dots, perception can matter as much as fact. That's where Terrence Howard enters the story, and why his role hits differently. Terrence wasn't a critic from the outside. He was once firmly in Oprah's orbit. When they starred together in The Butler, their chemistry became one of the most talked about aspects of the film's press run. Interviews were flirty, playful, and at times openly suggestive. Terrence spoke freely about his admiration for Oprah, praising her beauty and presence, while Oprah appeared equally unbothered, even amused by the attention. To the public, it looked like mutual respect, comfort, and a genuine connection between two industry heavyweights. That's why the alleged fallout raised eyebrows. According to industry whispers, things changed when Terrence began questioning Oprah's behind-the-scenes influence, particularly when it came to how black actors were treated and compensated. The tone reportedly shifted from friendly to confrontational, from admiration to disappointment. Terrence never launched a public crusade against her, but sources claim their private disagreements were intense, especially when conversations turned toward pay equity and career control. For someone who once spoke so warmly about Oprah, that distance spoke volumes. The real flashpoint, many believe, came with Taraji P. Henson. When Taraji publicly revealed that she was still being underpaid despite decades of success, and that she nearly walked away from The Color Purple overcompensation, it sent shockwaves through the industry. This wasn't a newcomer complaining about dues. This was an Oscar-nominated actress admitting she was still fighting just to be valued fairly. The conversation immediately became bigger than Taraji. It exposed a system where black women were expected to be grateful instead of paid, silent instead of assertive. Terrence, who had worked closely with Taraji before, reportedly took her situation personally. And this is where Oprah's name kept coming up in the background. Not as the sole decision-maker, but as someone with enormous influence over projects, narratives, and careers. The allegation wasn't that Oprah created the pay gap, but that she allegedly didn't challenge it when it mattered most. In an industry where her voice carries weight, that silence, or perceived complicity, became impossible for some to ignore. Enter 50 Cent, a man known for never forgetting a slight. To outsiders, his public support of Taraji looked like classic 50 behavior. Loud, provocative, and perfectly timed. But those close to the situation say it ran deeper. Years earlier, when 50 was still fighting to be taken seriously beyond his image, he attempted to secure an interview with Oprah to rebrand himself. He believed her platform could humanize him, especially for audiences that had already written him off. The interview didn't happen the way he hoped, and the rejection stuck with him. From 50's perspective, Oprah represented a gatekeeper who decided which black stories were palatable enough for mainstream consumption. Over time, his criticism hardened into a belief that her platform uplifted certain narratives while quietly freezing out others. So when Taraji spoke up, and later when Monique's long-standing accusations resurfaced, 50 didn't see isolated incidents. He saw confirmation of a pattern he believed existed for years. That's why his support wasn't subtle. It was public, aggressive, and intentional. By this point, the dots were connecting themselves. A controversial school with unresolved questions. Artists describing private reprimands and public undermining. Careers stalling after speaking out. Powerful allies turning distant. No single story was enough to dismantle Oprah's legacy. But together, they created a narrative people couldn't stop revisiting. Not because everyone agreed, but because too many stories sounded uncomfortably alike. And once that happens, the conversation stops being about proof and starts being about power. When people started revisiting Oprah's interviews with Ludacris, Dave Chappelle, and Toni Braxton, the similarities felt too loud to ignore. These weren't hostile confrontations on tabloid shows. They were polished, daytime conversations that looked respectful on the surface, but left the guests feeling diminished once the cameras stopped rolling. Ludacris has spoken openly about how his appearance, which was meant to promote the Oscar-winning film Crash, became less about his work and more about Oprah distancing herself from his music. Instead of engaging with nuance, the framing suggested disapproval of his artistry as a whole. And when the episode aired, his rebuttal was noticeably absent. To viewers at home, it looked like quiet acceptance. To Ludacris, it felt like being edited into silence. Dave Chappelle's interview struck an even deeper nerve. At a moment when he was already under intense scrutiny after walking away from a massive comedy deal, the conversation leaned heavily into questioning his mental stability. Chappelle later pushed back, explaining that paranoia wasn't irrational for a black man suddenly labeled a $50 million asset. But the damage was already done. The mainstream takeaway wasn't complexity or context, it was doubt. For many fans, that interview marked the first time Oprah's platform felt less like a safe space and more like a courtroom, where the narrative had already been decided. Toni Braxton's experience added an emotional layer to the pattern. She went into her interview as a longtime admirer, only to walk away feeling publicly scolded. Questions about her finances, spending habits, and personal responsibility were framed in a way that made her feel small rather than supported. Toni later said the exchange shocked her, not because accountability was unfair, but because the tone felt punitive, almost performative, as if her vulnerability was being used to send a message to the audience. Different guests, Different circumstances, same lingering feeling. The power dynamic was never in question, and the edit always favored Oprah. Then there's Monique, the story that refused to die, no matter how hard the industry tried to move past it. When Monique first accused Oprah, Tyler Perry, and Lee Daniels of blackballing her after she declined unpaid promotional work for Precious, she was quickly labeled difficult, ungrateful, and unprofessional. For years, that narrative stuck. Opportunities dried up. Invitations stopped coming. And the industry largely treated her absence as self-inflicted. But as conversations around labor, boundaries, and fair compensation evolved, people started looking back at Monique's claims with fresh eyes. What made Monique's story resonate later wasn't just time, it was validation. When 50 Cent publicly supported her, demanding apologies and openly questioning why she had been sidelined for so long, the tone shifted. Suddenly, this wasn't just one woman complaining. It was another powerful figure saying out loud what others had only whispered, that refusing to play along shouldn't cost someone their career. And Monique didn't change her story. The audience changed its willingness to listen. And once that door opened, people began reevaluating how often Oprah's disapproval seemed to coincide with professional fallout. So why is all of this resurfacing now? Timing matters. The entertainment industry is in a reckoning era, one shaped by public distrust, collapsing gatekeepers, and a post-Diddy climate where power is no longer assumed to be benevolent. Social media has given audiences long memories and instant access to old footage, interviews, and receipts that once lived in archives. Clips don't disappear anymore. They circulate, get recontextualized, and compared side by side. What once felt isolated now looks cumulative. There's also a growing skepticism toward untouchable figures. The idea that someone can do decades of good work and therefore never be questioned doesn't land the same way it used to. Audiences are more comfortable holding two truths at once. That someone can be influential and flawed, generous and harmful, empowering and controlling. And in that space, stories that were once dismissed as bitterness start to sound like warnings that came too early. Which brings us to the uncomfortable question hanging over all of this. Is Oprah being unfairly targeted because of her power and visibility? Or is this what happens when influence goes unchecked for too long, insulated by praise and protected by legacy? There's no verdict here, only tension. Because the stories aren't going away, and neither is Oprah's impact. What remains to be seen is whether this moment becomes another chapter quietly absorbed into her mythology, or the point where the public finally decides that even icons have to answer hard questions.